close your eyes and pull like a dog.
And a new Irish record for Phil Healy, 22.99.
Christy Cooney hands over the Sam Maguire Cup to Ger McCarthy, Cork All-Ireland champions for the 7th time ever.
Hello and welcome to the Star Sport podcast. My name is Ger McCarthy of the Southern Star, and I'm joined as always by Star Sport editor Ger McCarthy. On today's podcast, we're revisiting the 2005 All-Ireland Ladies Football Final between Cork and Galway as part of our Classic Game series, and joining us on the line to do so is LGFA Local Journalist of the Year and host of the Ladies Football Podcast on Red FM, Mr. Ger McCarthy. Now, before we look at the game itself, lads, I want to get a sense of where Cork were going into the final. We all know about the years of dominance that followed 2005, but this was their first ever All-Ireland final appearance. So Kieran, I'll come to you first. Why had ladies football remained dormant in Cork for so long?
So Cork at different levels, going back junior over the years, they weren't too bad at ladies football, but they never made the breakthrough at senior level, Jack. Like 2005 was the Cork ladies' first ever All-Ireland final, but go back a game before that when they played Mayo in the semi-final. That was Cork's first time ever in an All-Ireland ladies senior football semi-final, and earlier that year in 2005 the Cork ladies team won the National League for the first time and won the Munster senior title for the first time. So it was the start of a dynasty. There was a good cohort of talented players coming through, but Eamon Ryan was the mastermind, the kind of magician behind it all. Like his input and his influence on the team, I think everybody knows at this stage the impact that Eamon had with the Cork ladies football team. But rewind to 2004 and Cork had lost it in the All-Ireland quarter-final to Mayo. So they were kind of building the whole time. They were getting better, but 2005 was the big breakthrough. First getting to the semi-final and then getting to the final, and they won that, and the rest is history.
Well, we might come back to Eamon Ryan in a few minutes, but just looking back on the Cork team from the 2005 final, Ger, we can see it was littered with stars, the likes of Breach Corkery, Rena Buckley, Valerie McCarthy, Nulla Cleary, and so on and so forth. But what was the perception of the team coming into this game? Obviously, Kieran mentioned they had been building, they won the league and they won the Munster Championship, but was there a sense that this team, that these players would go on to become the household names that they did, or were they still kind of an unknown quantity?
I think they were still pretty much an unknown quantity up to 2005. They had been, if you read, I know we'll talk about it, Relentless, Mary White's brilliant book about Cork ladies football set up. They had been training unbelievably hard under Eamon Ryan and had been coming close. And I think one of the turning points, if you want to call it that, in 2005 was beating Galway in the National League final. And there was a bit of controversy about that because it was originally fixed for Roscommon, which is unusual that a National League final would be fixed so close to one of the counties like Galway. But as it turned out, the pitch was waterlogged. It was moved to Limerick and Cork won it. And Cork were pretty upset about that, the Cork players and the management team. And they made a point, of turning up that thing and getting that result. But coming into it, the likes of Breed Stack, Breach Corkery, certainly Rena Buckley, Donaghmore were one of the strongest club teams in the country. I mean, Donaghmore went to an All-Ireland final the same year, only to be beaten in the decider by a Dublin club. So there was certainly some experience of playing outside of Cork. They were pretty competitive in Munster over the previous number of years. But I think if you're looking for a reality check for that team and for in terms of self-belief, beating Galway, who were one of the kingpins, the queens of ladies football, in a National League final was hugely important. And we'll talk about it probably before the end. But 2005 was not just a huge year for the Cork seniors, but underage as well. Under 16 All-Ireland champions, under 14 All-Ireland semi-finalists, junior All-Ireland semi-finalists. And it was also the first year a team called Mourne went on to win a first ever junior club title. So it was a changing time, Jack. Certainly Cork were coming around the time that Mayo, Monaghan, Armagh and Galway would have been up at the top, would have been considered the top teams. But I really believe that National League final and the kind of shenanigans that went on in the build-up to it gave Cork an edge. I mean, the likes of Breach Corkery, Valerie McCarthy, they don't need an edge nowadays when you look at them, but back then they were a strong team. They certainly didn't have any superstars. I suppose Valerie Mulcahy possibly was, and Breed Stack were the two standout players, and definitely Rena Buckley. And they also had dual players because they won a camogie title that year as well. So hard-working, a coming team, but certainly not necessarily considered for an All-Ireland title in 2005 until they got over Galway in that league final.
Well, Ger, you mentioned Mary White's book, Relentless, which kind of looks back at all the success that they had. And Kieran, you had touched on Eamon Ryan's input into what made them such a winning machine. But I was just flicking back through her book this morning, and there's a reference to conflict or a certain lack of camaraderie within the camp before Eamon came on board. And maybe that was the reason for the team not kind of getting the success that they went on to achieve. Have either of you kind of any insight into what that conflict may have been, or why there was a lack of camaraderie? Was it just the fact that everyone's coming from different clubs, or what was it? Joe, we'll come to you first, and then Kieran, you maybe pick up on it.
I think you have to understand the landscape for Cork ladies football in 2005. It's certainly, even in the 2 years preceding that, it had little or no media coverage. It was being covered, but not to the extent that it is nowadays or over the past couple of years. And you only had a handful of clubs in each of the grades that were usually successful, Dunamore being one of them. So there was, like any team, male or female, there were certainly rivalries. And I suppose Cork not being a force on the inter-county scene and never having been successful, or not for a long time, people, like anything, were wary of giving away too much. And probably, I think from I know the passage that you're talking about in Mary's book, I think at that stage it wasn't so much that people didn't like each other, but there was a certain amount of mistrust. I mean, are we going to train this way? Are we going to let on, or let one of our big rivals know about something that we do in training that might give away something? What Eamon Ryan did, in a nutshell, was explain to everyone very quickly and very succinctly, if we all have a common goal, it doesn't matter what background, what team you're coming from, we'll be successful. And the simplicity of the way Eamon works is the key to Cork's success. I found this out now, not just from the book, but from actually speaking to him. He uncomplicated everything. He brought it down to a certain level, gave them all respect. But what he does, and all the players say this, and Kieran will probably can expand on this, he put trust in the players to do things themselves, something perhaps that they hadn't been used to up to that point. Because you join an inter-county team and you expect the manager's going to be, and the backroom team will dictate an awful lot of what you need to do. But what Eamon did from day one was kind of nicely and in his own kind of way explain to people, I'm putting my trust in you to do X, Y and Z, and if you do that, we will be successful.
Kieran? I suppose Eamon came in with a kind of a reputation and a track record from the men's game. So like George said, at the time, ladies football, it isn't what it wasn't what it is now. So for the Cork ladies senior football team to get a man of the kind of standing of Eamon Ryan, and think back to the 1983 Munster final that we covered in last week's Classic Games, when that Cork team beat a 9 in a row Chasing Kerry team with that late Tiggy Murphy goal. Eamon Ryan was over that Cork senior men's team, and in later life Eamon came back on board with the Cork senior team in recent years as well. So when you bring in a man with such a football knowledge and a reputation and a standing like that, it makes people sit up and take notice. And it also shows in that Cork ladies football meant business at the time, that they were taking this quite seriously, because they saw the talent of players coming up, and Joe was listed them there, like, and at the likes of Nolly Cleary and all to that list, like incredible talent. So he was the right man at the right time. He got them playing like a team because they had the talent. He pulled them all together, and they just took off then, like, and once they started then they just didn't stop.
Just something you mentioned, Ger, a few minutes ago about the media coverage that ladies football had in 2005. Obviously we know that side of the game has been improved massively in recent years, and you can see that in the attendances that go to Croke Park for the All-Ireland ladies final. But where was ladies football generally in 2005? The attendance at this game was up around 24,000, so it wasn't poorly attended by any stretch, and especially for that time. But generally, where was the game of ladies football kind of in the public consciousness, and also how the players were treated? Because I know this particular Cork team probably didn't have the best of training facilities starting off.
They didn't have any training facilities started off, to be quite honest. They tell you that themselves. I guess it's not that it wasn't being covered, let's be honest about it, because Mary White was doing a lot of work, Jim O'Sullivan in the Irish Examiner, and there would be a certain amount in the Southern Star as well. But the landscape of Cork sports journalism, as you probably know yourselves at that point, or you may not know, it was predominantly male GAA orientated. And what that means is the idea with local newspapers, including the Southern Star, was you would cover as much of the men's games and underage here and there as you could. Ladies football was covered, but it just wasn't seen as being a selling point, or it wasn't seen as a market at that point. And that's not being disrespectful. That's just a fact of life. But it was being covered. And I think what has really helped ladies football in the last 3 to 4 years, probably more than anything, would, in my opinion, social media. Because the Cork LGFA, like the ladies football, the 2020 initiative that wasn't around back then, has tapped into getting at the younger underage players, skills competitions, putting them through social media. Had social media been around, Jack, in 2005, I honestly think Cork ladies football would have got a lot more of the respect that it gets now. It's a lot of retrospective respect that it gets at the minute. Like C103 radio station was covering all those finals, something that wasn't necessarily done in a lot of other counties at the time. But it was still a fledgling sport. It did not have the respect that it deserved. You mentioned the attendance, 23,000. That was up 3,000 from the year before the All-Ireland, which was a significant thing back then. But you look at the attendances now, and I think ladies football is still fighting and will continue to fight. But that's not a media issue when it comes to ladies football. It's a societal issue, and it's a whole other podcast that I think a lot of people pander to ladies football still and say, aren't they great and isn't it fantastic, but like, you know, let's go over to the men's thing because that's where it stands. As a journalist who's been covering these matches, and Kieran will verify this, go to a ladies football game over the last 24 months, the standard of football, the standard of goal scoring and point taking and free taking, superior to the men's, and I'll stand over that at senior and intermediate level when it comes to the men's. You only get really tight, entertaining matches in the Senior Football Championship in Cork at the end of the championship. You get a lot of dead rubbers and kind of really boring, overly defensive games. You do not get that at ladies football, and that has filtered down to the underage sections in Cork, definitely in the underage. Look at the success they've had at underage, under 14, under 16 minor. And I go back to it again. 2005 was hugely significant because the under-14s got to an All-Ireland semi-final, which was significant in itself. The under-16s won the All-Ireland and beat Dublin, who had a huge pick back then, as they do now. And the minors only lost out in the semi-final that year, having had a player sent off late in the game against Donegal. Football was changing back then. Football has changed now, but there's still a long way to go for ladies football. And the ladies football community will tell you that. But in terms of its coverage, it was being covered, but not to the extent. And Kieran has to take a lot of credit for that too, in fairness, because before I got an award, Kieran also got an award for deservingly putting ladies football on the front page of the Southern Star Sports section repeatedly, talking about the West Cork players that were making the Cork inter-county panels, not just at senior. He started pushing that in West Cork along with the Southern Star, and that was significant at the time because I see it at ground level now. I see the numbers, the sheer numbers of girls playing ladies football in Cork, having heroines and heroes to look up to, the likes of Valerie Mulcahy, Breed Stack, Rena Buckley, you name them, and even the modern day ones, is very, very important to a young girl who's playing football. And to be able to access them and to be able to see them at close quarters has helped Cork football develop.
Okay, well, let's take a quick look at the game itself then. The 2005 All-Ireland Ladies Football Final. Galway were defending champions, but Cork had beaten Mayo, the era's dominant side, in the semi-final, as both of you touched on earlier. But Kieran, what was the Cork mindset ahead of the final? Were they going into the game with fear, or did they fancy themselves? Did they think they were going in to break this hoodoo that Cork had never landed an All-Ireland senior title?
I was chatting to Rena Buckley for the Classic Games piece in this week's Southern Star, and Rena made a point that once Cork defeated Mayo in the semi-final, they felt a lot more confident about facing Galway in the final, because up to then Cork had never beaten Mayo in the championship. So to beat that Mayo team, even though they weren't reigning All-Ireland champions, the Cork team got a huge boost out of that. And also, I touched base with Juliet Murphy this week, and when she got back to me, I just asked her, I said, does any game in your whole time at Cork stand out to you as being significant? And she actually pinpointed the 0-5 semi-final against Mayo, because that was the game that Cork beat Mayo and they got confidence from that. Rena was telling me that obviously they respected and rated the Galway team, but they knew they could beat Galway. Like Ger kind of mentioned earlier, they'd beaten them in the league earlier that year. They'd beaten them in the years before as well when they'd met. So while they respected Galway, they didn't fear them at all, and that really kind of helped them going into their first All-Ireland final, because it was all new to them. They'd never played in Croke Park. It was their first All-Ireland final, an inexperienced group of players. But what they'd actually, 2 weeks before the All-Ireland final in October, the Cork Camogie team was playing in an All-Ireland final as well, and there were 5 players who were dual players at the time, including Rena. And Eamon Ryan took the Cork ladies football team up to Dublin that weekend. He took them to the Camogie final. He arranged for after the game that the Cork ladies footballers got a 30-minute kick around on Croke Park. They got a tour of the dressing rooms. They walked out the tunnel. So he was familiarising the footballers with the big stage, and he was trying to take the fear out of it. And the players mentioned afterwards, after they won the All-Ireland, that tour of Croke Park and that kick around really did help them, because they got to see the stadium. They got to be in the stadium when Cork beat Tipperary in the Camogie final, so they got to hear the crowd roaring. They got to see the atmosphere, so they got to soak in an All-Ireland final atmosphere and what goes along, all the trappings, before they played one themselves. So bit by bit, Eamon was, like I said, taking the fear factor out, giving them a little bit of experience. So they went into that final against Galway, not fearing Galway, and having some idea of what an All-Ireland final day was like. But like in Mary White's book Relentless, and there's a lovely passage, and it's about Elaine Hart and Breed Stack, just their experience of running out onto Croke Park the day of the All-Ireland final. And Breed Stack was saying that when she ran out, she was keeping her head down and didn't want to look up into the crowd, but she saw the Galway captain looking up into the crowd and waving to someone that she knew, and Breed was thinking, how the hell is she doing that? It's an All-Ireland final. But the Galway players had that experience, whereas Cork didn't. But then Cork got a good start, 2 early points, and that settled them down.
Sure, just when you were looking back on the game in preparation for this, what stood out for you? What stood out for me mainly was the fact that Galway were this free scoring team in the lead up to the championship. In Kieran's piece, it mentions that they scored 16 goals in the lead up to the final, and then they barely mustered a chance in the final. What are your own memories of the game in terms of Cork's overall performance?
I think the overall performance, they played probably worse during the year, and probably may have won games. Like I don't think they were firing on all cylinders, and probably the occasion got to them, I think, which Kieran alluded to there at the start. There's a couple of things though that did stick out. There was a girl called Niamh Fahy who was playing for Galway. She was their top scorer. She was also an Irish under-19 soccer international and had played for Ireland I think 2 weeks before. And early in the second half, I'm pretty certain that it's Elaine Hart, who is another player that doesn't get talked an awful lot about, but was hugely significant and important to that Cork team. And Cork have been fortunate in that down through the years they've had very, very good goalkeepers. They've got one now in Martine, obviously, from Clonakilty and Ballinascarty in goal there. But Elaine Hart made a save from Niamh Fahy. I think it was early in the second half, and the game was still kind of in the melting pot. And that save seemed to boost Cork. I mean, they kicked on after that for a while, and then they also brought on a substitute, Deirdre O'Reilly, in the second half. And I think I could be wrong, I think she was fouled for the penalty. And Valerie Mulcahy, who got 1-5 on the day, outstanding as always. Like, it's still only 22, which is crazy, when you think about it. Put away the penalties, but like there was some fantastic scores. But what I suppose Elaine saved the penalty from Valerie, and also the fact that the tactics, Galway tried to change their tactics in the second half, and the likes of Breed Stack was freed up a bit. She wasn't actually man marking or woman marking anybody. She really came into the game, and I think that helped Cork. And it wasn't an outstanding performance by any means. They would have better performances in the All-Ireland finals that would follow, against Armagh, a tight game, against Mayo, against Monaghan, a fantastic performance 3 years later. But it was, as Kieran said, it was hugely important for those players because it was the first one and the nerves were gone then. They knew what to expect from an All-Ireland final. They'd been superbly prepared by Eamon, as Kieran said there as well. But small things turn All-Ireland finals, and a Galway team, as you said, that were well capable of racking up scores and had done so on that particular day. Were, like, especially Niamh Fahy, she would have been their standout forward, didn't get the space that they were normally used to. And I go back again to that league final. I didn't see the league final, but I read up on it. The Mayo game, as Kieran's piece this week points out, was a turning point for the players in their mentality. They'd beaten a real All-Ireland contender, an All-Ireland champion in Mayo. But I think Cork's backs were definitely up with the shenanigans that went on with changing the venue and the whole thing that went on with that. And they made a point of wanting to beat Galway in that league final. And for all the confidence that they had, they didn't play well in the first half against Galway in the All-Ireland final. But those 2 or 3 things that I mentioned there going their way, and Valerie McCarthy playing out of her skin, probably deservedly saw them win the match out.
Just to pick up on a point that you made there, Ger, about this experience in Croke Park preparing them then to go on to do what they did. Had you any inkling at the time, or looking back with the benefit of hindsight, can you say that you had any idea of what was coming next? Or I know it's impossible to predict something like that, but had you a sense that this team maybe had something about them?
Honestly, no. And I remember the excitement of Cork getting to a ladies football final and reading about it and not having followed them for a couple. It would take me 3 or 4 years, to be quite honest. If I'm being honest, it was 3 or 4 years later when they had won. I think it was 4 or 5 in a row, and they were going well. I took a real interest in the team then, because a lot of the matches I didn't have access to. I was listening to Paddy Palmer again on the match report, on the All-Ireland final and Munster final reports. I took a real interest then because the profile of the players was being raised year after year, and I think having any kind of West Cork interest, it was a few years before there was a real kind of West Cork interest and representation on the panel. I honestly didn't take much notice, but no, absolutely no notion. I knew from seeing the highlights of the games and some of the scores that Valerie Mulcahy was getting that this was a special talent. And I suppose the other thing that helped the Cork footballers, whether they like to admit it or not, is the dual players that they had, because they were on TV with the Camogie, then they were on TV. And Tina G, I think, deserve huge praise here as well, because Tina G were broadcasting all these games back in the day when it wasn't necessarily being picked up by RT or anyone else for that matter, and that slowly gave an audience, but it wasn't. And I'm absolutely adamant about this. In the times we live in, had it not been for social media over the last number of years, certainly Cork ladies football wouldn't enjoy the profile that it enjoys now, because it's reaching a much bigger audience. But no, I think when they beat Galway back then, I knew very little about them. It was only when they won the 3rd or 4th that I started to take a real interest and start to look into writing about the whole idea. But it's only recently, as I said, being honest again, over the last 2 or 3 years, that I've gotten really stuck into the underage side of it and the professional structures that are there now. But none of that would be there. None of that would be there without those players, without Eamon Ryan, and without that first success that kick-started such an absolute dynasty. An absolute dynasty is the only way you could describe it.
Well, Ger, you said earlier that they basically had no training facilities at the time, Joe. They were probably second or third cousin to the senior men's hurling and footballers. And you also mentioned that because of this team now, there are professional structures in place all the way down to underage for girls right across the county, and even in many cases across the country, thanks to this Cork team. So Kieran, just to start wrapping up today's chat, what would you say is the legacy of the 2005 team? Obviously they went on to achieve absolute greatness and they're almost unparalleled in their levels of success, but just looking back on 2005, if you could put their legacy down to 1 or 2 things, what would you say it is?
That was the first All-Ireland win, obviously, and I think that team sparked, they won 10 out of 11 All-Irelands, and what that created was heroes. There were heroes dotted all over that team, from that core group of players who were involved in those 10 All-Ireland successes, and we've mentioned them all: the Valerie Mulcahy's, Nolly Cleary, Elaine Hart, Breed Stack, Deirdre O'Reilly, Geraldine O'Flynn, Angela Walsh, and so on, Juliet Murphy. They're legends of the game, and what they are, like, if you're a young boy or a young girl, you look up to someone, you have a hero that you look up to, and all of a sudden young girls across the county had these heroes to look up for, these heroes who put Cork ladies football on the map, and the current Cork team have kind of taken that on. Kind of, you can swap Orla Finn for Valerie Mulcahy, you can swap Martine O'Brien for Elaine Hart, Darren and Ciara O'Sullivan for Nolly Cleary, and so on, Melissa Duggan for, I don't know, Breed Stack, or it's heroes. And once you have those heroes and they're real life people, and you get to watch them play, and they're living in your community, it just drives it on, because success does breed success, no matter what sport you're in, whether it's football, rowing, soccer, you name it. If you have locals that are successful, more people perk up interest, and they watch and they listen and they learn more, and it just breeds more success. So that 2005 win sparked it all. Rena Buckley was telling me that they were intent on coming back in 2006 because they wanted to prove that they weren't one-hit wonders. and I think we can say without a doubt they weren't. They topped the charts for 10 out of 11 years, which was incredible. So that team did so much for ladies football, not just in Cork, but think nationally for a bit, because like Ger mentioned, ladies football just wasn't getting the column inches, and it wasn't getting the publicity that it deserved nationally. But everybody knows about this dominant Cork ladies football team. They know that Eamon Ryan was manager. They know of the likes of Valerie and Breed and Oleg and all these players. And that's down to that Cork team, because they helped raise the profile of ladies football. Other counties were probably sick of the sight of Cork winning, but they won because they were the best at the time. So that team helped elevate ladies football to an entirely new level and brought it to a whole new audience and created a whole new wave of young players coming through, and ladies football is still reaping the benefits now.
George, do you want to come in on that there?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I had got a list of in 2005, and sorry, I have to correct something I said earlier on. Donaghmore got to an All-Ireland club final that year, but were actually beaten by Ballyborden St Enda's. Sorry, they didn't win it. Apologies to Ballyborden or Ballyborden listeners. Mourneabbey did win the junior one though, so that was junior All-Ireland title. In 2005, the All-Star nominees Elaine Hart, Rena Buckley, Angela Walsh, Ciara Walsh, Breach Corkery, Juliet Murphy, Norita Kelly, Amanda Murphy, Deirdre Riley, Valerie Mulcahy. Angela Walsh, Breach Corkery, Juliet Murphy, Deirdre Riley and Valerie Mulcahy all won All-Stars. The Munster Young Player of the Year was Amanda Murphy. The Vodafone Player of the Year was Valerie Mulcahy. A Texgun National Sporting Award went to Valerie Mulcahy. And then you had Munster Senior Club Champions and All-Ireland runners-up in Donaghmore, and Munster Junior Club Champions in Mourneabbey and All-Ireland winners. 2005 was a significant year, and I mentioned the under-14s got to an All-Ireland semi-final. The under-16s winning an All-Ireland football final was also significant, because the next batch of players that came along over the 4 or 5 year period had experiences of winning All-Irelands. And I just think when you see that list, you kind of take it for granted now with Cork ladies football, but back then that was for that amount of players to be nominated, for that amount of players to win All-Stars, and then for all those other accolades to come along. I suppose looking back at it now, Jack, you asked me earlier on, we should have probably picked up on it a bit more. It was the start of something special. We just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah, I think no one can say it better there, Ger. We absolutely love the passion that was shown on today's show, but I think we're going to have to wrap up. We're just getting a bit pushed time-wise, so I just wanted to point to Kieran's piece in this week's Southern Star that's available in shops across West Cork now, where he revisits this game and he spoke to members of the panel, including Rena Buckley. As I said, you can get that in shops across West Cork, but obviously if you can't make it to the shops, you can purchase a postal subscription. Just call 028 212 00 and we'll get a copy of this week's Southern Star delivered to your front door. Or if you want it on your computer, tablet or smartphone, just log on to www.thesouthernstarTV/e-paper and you can read the Southern Star in its digital format. Thanks for listening to this week's Star Sport podcast. We'll be back next week on Tuesday with, I don't know what we'll talk about, Kieran, but we'll talk about something or other. If you enjoy these shows, please make sure to rate, review and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Acast, Stitcher or wherever else you listen to the show. Great stuff, lads.
Good stuff.
That was good.
Good stuff. Cheers, Ger. Thanks for that.
Thanks a million, Ger.
No bother. Anytime. Mind yourselves.
Good stuff. I'll give you a shout there soon, Ger, about the weekend.